Namaste, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to today's speech. This is a very controversial topic, but before we get into that, a couple of housekeeping rules. If you all want to stay off the video, you want to turn off the video, that's most welcome. Please do that if you want to stay anonymous. Number two, uh, I'll deliver the speech first, and then towards the end, we'll open up for Q&A. But when you ask your questions, please be brief. Ask your questions in 20 seconds or less. Don't start with a lot of context setting. Don't start with a lot of preamble before you come to the question. Keep it really brief. It'll be ideal if you can just write down your question or even type it into the chat. Then it's easy to pick it up. The reason for that is we want to have a reasonable number of questions which are substantive and to the point answered during the speech. Um, with that, I'm going to get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's topic. The topic is Prophet Muhammad on trial, the Ayesha episode. Uh, there has been a controversy. It's not a very long-standing controversy, but it has been there for the last few decades. This is about Muhammad marrying a much younger woman, Aisha. And what's really the controversy all about? And that's what we are going to discuss today. But more importantly, I'm going to put Muhammad on trial. And as part of this discourse, I'm not just relying upon the most vulnerable arguments to target, but I am going to target the arguments made by some of the most respected Islamic scholars in the world today. I was thinking of covering two of them. One is Sheikh Omar Sulaiman, and then the other one is Yasir Qadhi. But then, for the sake of time, I'm only going to focus on Yasir Qadhi today. Maybe another day I could pick up Omar Sulaiman. So, who is so? With that context, all right. So, why do the views of Yasir Qadhi matter? So, who is he? So Yasir Qadhi is a Pakistani American imam. He is a highly educated person. He went to the Islamic University in Medina, where he trained in all of the Islamic tenets, texts, traditions, everything. Then he also earned his MPhil and PhD from Yale University in the United States. And he is the author of multiple books, multiple lectures, and also an imam, and highly respected both within the Islamic community pretty much around the world, as well as within the academic circles. And Yasir Qadhi, uh, 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 oh, just one request. Rajiv, is there a way we can mute the ping when
Done.
everyone joins? Yeah,
Done.
thank you. Yeah. So, and Yasir Qadhi is a very ultra conservative Muslim imam, and he does not try to change his arguments based on the audience. He tries to stick to the texts and traditions of Islam. So in that sense, the views he articulates are the traditional, authentic, and the most orthodox Islamic views. And when we take on those views, and when we either refute them or accept them, we are doing justice to the entire topic and discourse. And that's why I think the views of Yasir Qadhi matter the most. So let's start with a very quick context setting here. And Aisha, how old was she when she got married to Muhammad? She was 6 years old. At that time, Muhammad was probably around 51 or 52 years old. And 3 years later, when Aisha was 9, Muhammad consummated his marriage with Aisha. After that, Aisha and Muhammad lived together for 9 years before Muhammad died. And that means by the time Muhammad died, Aisha was still a teenager. She was at the most 18 years of age. She becomes a widow at that time, and then she is declared. And before Muhammad dies, he declares all of his wives would be mothers of the believers. And hence, they could not remarry or any of those things. So, this is the overall context. And why has this been controversial of late? So, in the last few decades, many critics of Islam who are aware of this episode have started calling Muhammad a pedophile rapist. The argument being he was a much, much older man. He was in his 50s. He was 54 when he consummated his marriage with a 9-year-old child. And that's not only morally disgusting, but also it's a pedophile rape because um, a small child who is barely 9 years of age does not really understand what sex is, and she cannot consent to having sex. So the critics of Islam have called this a rape. How does Yasir Qadi deal with this? I'm going to play a brief video. Please tune in.
And the age of Aisha was a given. It was something that was understood to be very young. Why? Because there is an authentic hadith in Bukhari and Muslim in her own voice. She narrates that I was 6 years old when the nikah took place with the Prophet ﷺ, and I was 9 years old when the nikah was consummated. And every bit of information that we know fits into this narrative. So why deny it?
Okay. So Yasir Qadi is not trying to sugarcoat, and Yasir Qadi is very direct. Everything I told in his words, she was 6 when they got married, and she was 9 when the marriage was consummated. And he does not want the Muslims to deny this because, in his opinion, this is justifiable because this is there in the Quran, this is there in the Hadiths, this has been sanctioned by none less than Allah. And here are some of the references in case you want to know which hadith he is talking about. And once again, this hadith once again confirms that uh, she was 9 years old when the marriage was consummated, 6 when they got married, and very importantly, they remained together only for about 9 years. Okay, so Yasir Qadi also objects to retroactively projecting modern sensibilities on the 7th century. So he says today, um, we find this kind of a practice highly repugnant, that a very young girl can be married off to a much older man. But this was pretty normal in the 7th century Arabia. That's the argument he puts forth. But then he also makes a concession, even though this was all right, this was normal in 7th century Arabia, today we don't have to accept this practice. And he says he is supportive of banning this practice of marrying of young girls within Islam. Let's listen to him.
And number two, Aisha never complained, so who are we to complain or find fault? Aisha never was irritated at any of this, so it doesn't make any sense for some modern, person to then say, oh, that doesn't, yani, who are we? She enjoyed a beautiful marital life. She was the luckiest lady and the luckiest wife in all of history. And who are we then to back project our sensibilities on this? It's a different time, different culture. And the main point, it is not wajib to replicate the culture of 7th century Arabia. Nobody is saying we need to take this and do it in our time. That's the key point here. And I'll jumping the gun here, but I have no problem advocating that in our culture, our time, our era, we can make it illegal in an Islamic system to marry a lady of a young age. No problem.
All right. So his two arguments are, number one, we cannot retroactively project today's sensibilities on 7th century Arabia. At the time, it was acceptable. And Aisha herself had no complaints. And why are we complaining? So how do we respond to that argument? That argument is, I think, pretty easy to respond to because this starts with the premise that I'll request everyone not to start a chat question. That's extremely distracting to me. Please don't do that. Okay. So there is a Q&A at the end. Ask your questions only at that time. So, so in case of all right. So let me just go back. So and please don't chat again. Don't interrupt like that. Okay. So and Yasir Qadi objects to retroactively projecting today's sensibilities on 7th century Arabia, and the argument he makes are those are acceptable in those days, and Aisha herself was extremely happy, and she did not complain. But I think this argument is moot because a 9-year-old child or even a teenager does not have all the worldly experience. And when she is abused, when she is made part of an abusive marriage, a pedophile marriage, she may not always have the capability to complain. How do we know that? We know that from today. The ISIS abducted a lot of Yazidi girls. Those were girls who were barely 9 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, and then they were forcibly married off to ISIS fighters. And many of them were turned into sex slaves and repeatedly raped day in and day out. And after a few months, or sometimes after a couple of years, when they were rescued, many of them not only did not complain, but many of them displayed Stockholm syndrome. And many of them would refuse to leave their captors. And then it took a lot of effort to bring them back and once again to rehabilitate them and to make them lead a life that's somewhat normal after that. So, this being the case, the trauma that a young child goes through when she is married off at the age of 6, and then when she is forced to have sex with her husband, who is much, much older than her own father, or old enough to be her grandfather, who was 54 at the time, she undergoes a lot of trauma. She may or may not express that. But it's extremely unreasonable to say that since she did not complain, she was extremely happy with the marriage. And I don't think she was extremely happy with the marriage because we have a couple of references from the Hadiths and one which is also indirectly confirmed by the Quran. There is one Hadith where Ayesha recounts that Prophet Muhammad often imagined having sex with his wives when he had not. So this she says somewhat sarcastically, and so this is one indication that the relationship that the two of them had was not really an intimate one, and it was not a relationship that she had really enjoyed. And there was another incident where she is accompanying Prophet Muhammad on uh, one of the raids across the desert, and during that time she gets left behind, and then she um, comes and a few hours later she returns with a young handsome man by the name Safwan, and this becomes a gossip all across the place that Aisha committed adultery with this young man. And uh, even Muhammad suspected her. She sends her back to her parents' place. And then there is a lot of gossip going around. He waits for a month and confirms that she has had her menses. And then a Quranic verse is revealed saying that, she is without a blemish. So this incident once again tells that there was a certain kind of an angst and tension between Aisha and Muhammad. It's not an ordinary tiff that married couple have. This was some serious problem. She was willing to take the risk of going out with another man and be at the very center of a huge controversy where she could be accused of being an adulteress. So this once again tells me that she was not really happily married. And in that case, I think Yasir Qadi's claim that she was happy, why are we to complain? I think to me sounds extremely hollow. But let's come to his concluding remark where he says he is supportive of banning child marriage now. If he really meant that, I think he probably might have, but I do not know. He may have calibrated that for a Western audience because he is a preacher in the United States. So, but if he said that, this actually flies against everything the Quran is saying. The Quran actually allows uh, a Muslim to marry a young girl. There is no age limit. And some of that we'll be seeing, I'll be playing some of those videos as well. There is no age limit. You can marry a girl of any age, even a girl who is 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old. Quran allows you to marry those girls. Number two, Quran allows Muslim men to consummate their marriage to young girls. And three, Quran allows them to even divorce those girls if the man is not satisfied with her. With this being the case, I think what Yasir Qadi is saying actually goes against some of the very fundamental uh, teachings and mandates given in the Quran, which I welcome. But I think this is a bigger problem for Yasir Qadi. But before we go into that, let's start with a very quick summary. Abdullah Samir is an ex-Muslim, and he has summarized all of these things brilliantly. And let's start with the first one uh, about the young age for marrying of a girl. Okay, so Quran 33:49. Let me start with setting the context. Quran 33:49 talks about what the uh, waiting period. It's called as iddah, right? What's the iddah period should be when a man divorces a woman? How long should a woman wait before she could remarry? So it talks about all of those scenarios, and it says if a man has consummated his marriage with his wife, then uh, uh, sorry, if a man has not consummated his marriage with his wife, but he divorces her, then there is no iddah. Okay, he can just let go of her, pay her the dues, the benefits, the meher, and all of those things, and just separate in a pleasant manner. That's all the Quran says. So this is for the marriage which has not been consummated. Now let's look at the Quranic verse, uh, which talks about those marriages which have been consummated. So that is verse number 65.4. In this one, it talks about different types of women, particularly about those women who have not yet menstruated. Okay, so that's the one I have highlighted here for you. And then in those cases, it says if the girl has not yet menstruated, then the waiting period is 3 months before she could remarry. Okay. And this has been discussed by a lot of Muslim commentators in what we call tafsir, and also what we call a lot of the Quranic commentaries. I'm going to present some of those, which once again Abdullah Samir has brilliantly summarized. Okay, so and here it confirms what this particular Quranic injunction means. It talks about very young girls. It says these are the girls who have not menstruated because of their young age. And it also contrasts here. It says those who do not menstruate anymore because they have attained menopause, and those who have not started menstruating yet. So it makes a distinction between two of them. And then it also talks about those who are too young that they have not started menstruating yet. So this means these are all prepubescent girls. And once again, time and again, Ibn Khatir talks about that. These are the girls who have not yet attained the age of menstruation. And then it talks about these are young girls. Their husbands divorced them after consummation, but they have not started menstruating yet. And once again, this last one once again confirms that these are children. That's the phrase they exactly use. So in other words, what we are seeing here is a large number of commentaries, and practically every one of the commentary of the Quranic tradition, the Sharia law, everything very clearly allows the marriage of a very old man to a very young girl who is prepubescent, who has not even attained, who has not even started menstruating. And these are the girls, since there is no age limit in Islam, when someone can go and marry a girl, one could technically take a 2-year-old girl and marry her off to a 60-year-old man, and he could go and have sex with her, and then he can divorce her subsequently. And some of these things have been discussed on Arabic news channels, Arabic television programs, and I'm going to play a few of those things where their own mullahs and imams who are scholars of Islam, they time and again confirm, yes, Allah has allowed this in Quran. The hadiths and the Sharia law confirm this, that a very young girl who has not yet started menstruating, who is prepubescent, can be married off. Her husband can have sex with her and can even divorce her. Let me play that.
دكتور احمد، يعني اذا كبرت حتعتبره ابوها، لانه هو اللي رباها، حيكون في مكانه ابوها.
لا ما هو رباها، لا، زوجها اصبح زوجها، اذا مات ترثه
على اوراق زوجها، لكن هي انا اتحدث نفسيا، يعني رضيعه، يعني اذا مين ما تبناها سواء زوجها او
انظر التشريع الاسلامي.
نعم، انا يستطيع ان يتزوج من رضيعه، هذا ما قلته دكتور احمد.
نعم صح، يعني أنا بتكلم عن هذا وبقول يعني نحن مركزين على النقطة دي، لا لنقطة جزئية بسيطة جدا.
نعم.
يعني
ولكن أثارت جدل كبير.
وراجل قال لك البنت عندها 9 سنين تعاشر أحسن من اللي عندها 20. واحنا مين مختلفين في سن الزواج ورفع سن الزواج، نرفعه ولا ما نرفعوش؟ الوضع ده ايه؟ 9 سنين تنفع؟
هو الراجل ده بيتكلم كلام. هو اولا ليس هناك في الشرع تحديد لسن الزواج، على طول كده ليس هناك في الشرع تحديد لسن الزواج.
يعني
ولكن
اللي فهمته
العرف
كده،
قضى.
اللي فهمته كده انك موافق.
نعم.
انت بتأيد الفتوى دي؟
مش بأيد الفتوى دي.
امال ايه؟
ده مش بأيد الفتوى دي.
يعني 9 سنين
بقول لك
تنفع؟
ان تحتمل الزوج، يعني تحتمل المعاشره، تحتمل الزوج، تحتمل
البنت
الزواج.
تحتمل الزواج من عندها كام سنه؟
نعم. انا ما اعرفش بقى. ما هو في عندها، في عندها، هقول لسيادتك،
الجدات
في بنت عندها 15 سنه ومقروضه قد كده وما تنفعش الحاجه وما تعرفش حاجه. في واحده عندها 10 سنين وتلاقي بسم الله ما شاء الله قد الحيطه مثلا. هي العمليه بتتوقف على ايه؟
يعني
على
مش مرتبطه بسن.
لا،
مش مرتبطه.
الشرع لم
يعني
يحدد سن.
البنت عندها 9 سنين وقد الحيطه تنفع تتجوز؟
ما ينفعش ليه؟
طب اكيد اتصلوا بينا على 91 235. اصل انا مش في مود مناقشتك النهارده فضيله الشيخ. كلام صعب قوي. 9 سنين وتتجوز ده
9 سنين وتتجوز. اذا قلت اذا
كانت قد الحيط
تطيق الفحل، يعني اللي هي بيقول ايوه. ما هي في الشرع.
بشكر دكتور ياسر انه اكثر صراحه من بعض الاعضاء اللي حاولوا يلتفوا حول تفسير موضوع زواج الاطفال الصغيرات السن، وان هو كان اكثر صراحه لدرجه ان هو قال كمان ما اشترطش سن البلوغ. ده حتى يعني فسر الايه الكريمه لمن لم تحض بعد، يعني ممكن في اي سن ان شاء الله 3 سنين طالما بامكانها انها يعني تطيق.
طب ايه تفسيرها عندك يا دكتور؟
الزوجيه.
معلش انا عايز تفسير الايه عندك يا دكتور.
ثاني اكمل يا دكتور ياسر.
جيبوا لي تفسير عند اي عالم من اهل العلم في الايه. انا بقول ايه من كلام الله.
حضرتك قلت والتي لم تحض.
ما انا بتكلم على ايه، مش بتكلم على انا. ده انا بقول قال الله.
ما انا عارفه حضرتك، ما انا بقول حضرتك
ما تقولوش تفسير، اصل انا ما فسرتش.
طيب
ده ربنا اللي بيقول ولا ايه؟ بعدين انتوا معتقدين صحتها ولا مش معتقدين صحتها؟ معتقدين القران ولا مش معتقدين القران؟
ده معناه في اي سن يا دكتور ياسر، مش شرط كمان سن البلوغ. يعني
انا بقول لحضرتك انت مقتنعه بالقران.
So here you can find something really disturbing, right? There are a lot of the interviewers, they are also Muslims, they are all living in Arab countries, and they are very disturbed by the fact that the Quran or the Islamic, I mean, they are not aware at that time. They are just listening to the statements coming from their imams and their muftis and their mullahs that a very young girl who is not even attained her puberty can marry and a man can have sex with her. They find it really disturbing. Okay, and then the mullahs, on the other hand, these are the scholars of Islam. They are defending it, and rightly so, by pointing out that Allah has approved this, and the Quran supports this, the Sharia law supports this, and who are you to deny that? That's their counter. So what does this tell you? This tells you that most of the Muslims are not aware of the Quranic teachings of the Sharia law in this regard. And when they come across it for the first time, they are shocked by that. They find it revolting. However, they are now faced with an option. Either they have to reject the Quran because it's the Quran that mandates that, or if they accept the Quran, then they have to accept this practice because these are the words of God. These are the words of Allah. For all the this is something which is mandated upon Muslims to follow, and they cannot really reject that. So this is exactly where Yasir Qadhi's stance that he is ready to make this illegal is highly problematic. That means he is actually rejecting what the Quran allows. He is rejecting what the entire Islamic tradition over the last 1300 years have supported. And he is rejecting what the Sharia law allows. And not only that, the problem is even bigger because the Quran very categorically says that Muhammad is the perfect role model for all Muslims to emulate for all times. And Muhammad, in this case, married, he was 54 when he consummated his marriage with Ayesha, who was a 9-year-old girl. And following the Quranic injunction, a Muslim may very well be within his rights to emulate the conduct of Muhammad because he's the perfect role model. That's what Allah tells. And that being the case, what Yasir Qadhi is now saying, the stance he is taking, while it is welcome, I would rather prefer a Muslim to say, no, I do not agree with this Quranic verse. I do not agree with Sharia. I do not agree with the Islamic practice of the last 1300 years because that's morally disgusting to me. I want to modernize. I welcome that. But in that case, he has to also have the honesty to reject what the Quran and all of the Islamic traditions have said all these years. And if you can reject one verse from the Quran, then what's stopping you from rejecting everything else? Because if you can reject one injunction and one mandate from Allah, you can reject every one of those. You can also reject the hijab, you can reject polygamy, you can reject stoning an adulteress to death, and you can reject all the blasphemy laws, you can reject all the apostasy laws. All of those come from the Quran, and then the hadiths, and then the Sharia laws. So that's a big problem Yasir Qadi will have to deal with. And on the other hand, if he just uh, came up with this argument so as not to invite a lot of ridicule and criticism from the Western audience, then that's being dishonest. And now, this is not something which is only practiced in uh, Middle East or in some Arab countries. This is practiced everywhere there is a Muslim community. In India, for example, there are a lot of package deals where young children who are not even teenagers or married off to much older men, many of them from the Gulf states. And Hyderabad is pretty much the epicenter for all of these things. The only reason I'm just showing the news clipping, this is from 2017. The only reason I'm showing these things is to let you know that this practice is so widely prevalent. And in many cases, there are victims of this child marriage, and it did not begin or end with Ayesha. And there are Ayeshas living in our midst every day until this day. So with that being the case, let me now um, uh, come to the closing parts of that. So in the case of Ayesha, Ayesha got married when she was only 6 years old, and she got divorced. Sorry, Muhammad consummated his marriage with her when she was 9 years old and when he was 54. And I would consider it to be something morally repugnant. And then after that, uh, she gets widowed when she is only 18 years of age. And Muhammad is, at the time when he dies, is around 63 years of age. And before he dies, Muhammad also comes up with another Quranic verse that declares that all of his wives are now mothers of the believers. And not only they have to wear the hijab, but they have to also go behind a screen. In other words, they cannot be seen by anyone. They cannot practically see any other men. So this is the life. We do not know how long she lived. There are some hadiths that indicate that she lived for another 20, 30 years. There are others that indicate that she might have lived for another 40 or 50 years. Regardless, for all of her life, she was denied any of the normal pleasures that a girl is entitled to. And she was turned into a child bride, and she was subject to pedophile rape. And then finally, she was denied even the basic decency of remarrying another person. Now let's come to the verdict. What's the verdict? My verdict is very straightforward. Okay. Can we argue that this practice was acceptable in the 7th century? I do not think so. Because to me, morality is not dependent on time, place, and circumstances. Morality is something which can be objectively determined and argued for. And a girl who is just 9 years old and who is forced to have sex with a man who is 54 years old would have found that experience extremely painful, extremely traumatic then and now. There is no difference in the two. And number two, there is something even more deeply disturbing here. Human beings have a very long period where a child or an infant is dependent on adults. So we have a gestation period of 9 months, and then the child needs the mother and the father for several years before he or she can crawl, walk, run, everything. So pretty much unlike a lot of other animals, human beings and mammals need a long period of childhood, and then the child uh, becomes independent to some extent only when she is 16 or 17 years of age. And until she turns 17, 16, whatever it is, this child implicitly trusts the adults she lives with. She hopes that they will be protecting her, and then they will be acting in her interest, and then they will allow her to mature and blossom into a full-fledged human being who can have the knowledge and the discernment to deal with to deal with her life in this world. And when that girl is forcibly married off and forced to have sex even before she has become pubescent, that's a complete betrayal of her trust. And I don't think there is anything more morally repugnant than abusing the trust of a child in the elders. And in this case, Muhammad, as well as Aisha's father Abu Bakr, betrayed her trust, abused her trust, and made her suffer. That makes Muhammad a very, very bad man. If today Muhammad were to live in the United States and repeat something like this, he would spend the rest of his life in a supermax prison. But since he is called the Prophet of Islam, he is not to be criticized, and his deeds ought to be justified by invoking the Quran, by invoking the Islamic traditions, and somehow the rest of the world is expected to keep silent about it. That's my verdict, and I'll pause here, and I'm ready to take questions now. Any questions? As I requested, please keep your questions really brief, 20 seconds, no more. So there's a type question. How can a 6-year-old child give consent? No, a child cannot. It's very simple as that.
I wish to ask you one question. Understand all these things, but what is the purpose of our discussion? Isn't it towards reforming the thing? In that case, how is it relevant that Muhammad did it then? We have to talk about how can we stop it now. I mean, we all know that it is wrong. So the question is, what are we going to discuss about fixing it? Or how can we influence that? I thought that could be more powerful in terms of our action than...
Thank you. Thank you. I can answer that question. First of all, I don't think this problem stopped with Ayesha. I gave you a lot of examples. Okay. This is authorized by the Quran. Okay. The Muslims and the Muslim ulema, they treat it as a command from Allah himself. And this practice continues until today. And then that's exactly the reason we are discussing this. If it had only happened with one Ayesha, but then Islam had reformed itself, we would not be discussing this episode today at all. And the only reason we are discussing is this has continued time and again, and it continues in India, in Hyderabad today. And as I showed, in the Muslim world, the mullahs and then the imams, they all justify this practice, and it is allowed today. And so why are we bringing this up? And there is only one way to deal with this, which is to point out, as Yasir Qadhi himself says, that this is coming directly from the Quran. This is coming directly from the Sharia. And hence, that is the reason Muslims are following it. And you have to challenge that. So you cannot challenge that without going to the root. And then the root is the Quran. And when you do that, you are effectively debunking and demonstrating that the Quranic teaching, which Muslims believe is a revelation from Allah, is actually a very despicable teaching. Okay, it's a,
may I interrupt you for a second?
No, please don't interrupt me. Okay. So, and this is the only way we can talk about that. And I don't think we can sugarcoat anything. And as we saw that that Arab channel I was playing, most of the interviewers are shocked that when a mullah points out that a very young girl who is prepubescent can be married off and can have sex. They are shocked by that because this is something we all find morally revolting. And only thing is, they do not believe that these are there in the Quran, these are there in the Sharia, these are the Islamic practices. And that's what we have to highlight. And when we do that, everyone will be confronted with two choices. One, stay moral and reject the Quran, and which means you are rejecting Islam, or you give up your morality and you become a dogmatic Muslim, one of the two. But this is the confrontation which Muslims cannot avoid, and we must force them to have that. And that's why
there is a different path.
No, once again, we are not having this kind of back and forth.
No, you are
once again
the same thing.
Okay,
Venkat, you are repeating the same thing. What I'm saying,
I'm going to take the next question. And for everyone, here is the request, right? If you want to have a back and forth and keep on interrupting, I'm not going to allow that. Okay. And if you have a brilliant idea of how to deal with these things, have your own lecture. Okay. And in mind,
is this a lecture or is it a discussion? Is it a lecture?
it is absolutely a lecture. It is not a discussion. Okay, that's
I
why I
didn't
said
know
your
that.
question is 20
No,
seconds or
I'm
less.
sorry. I didn't.
All right, don't interrupt anymore, please. Okay. Next question. Why is the leftist world hiding all of these truth in the name of minority rights and shamelessly propagating? Very, very simple, right? So the left is a totalitarian ideology, number one. And left ideology has never been bothered with the question of morality. And the left treats the Muslims as a vote bank. And what is the best way to preserve the vote bank? The only way to do that is to make sure that the Muslims live in a very medieval Islamic system where they are influenced by the mullahs, where they are influenced by the imams and others, and where they are told that you cannot challenge the Quran, you cannot challenge the Sharia, live by that. So that actually is very beneficial to the Muslims, to the leftists, because they can then harvest the Muslim vote bank. Next question is, based on morality and child abuse, can this not be addressed at UN? I do not know. Okay, I'm not a lawyer. I do not know how it works. Okay, same question. Why can't UN ban child marriage? I do not know whether it has banned or not, or whether it can ban or not. I do not. Okay, I'm not a lawyer. Any other question? If not, everyone, thank you very much for joining this speech today. Thank you very much.
Hello?
Oh, hi. Sorry. Is there any question? Maybe I'll take a couple
Yeah.
of more.
Yeah, just 2 seconds, just 2 minutes.
20 seconds for question, please. Go ahead.
Why are we discussing this on the Hindu? This is a Muslim discussion. Why are we discussing it on the Hindu concepts?
I am educating the Hindus. Okay. My objective is to educate the Hindus about a serious problem that is there in Islam. And then number two, no, please don't interrupt. I got your question. When I'm responding, please don't interrupt. As Hindus, we are and we should be concerned about dharma. And Muslim girls are not the property of Allah. They are not the properties of mullahs. And when we notice that the Quranic teachings and the Islamic teachings endanger the lives of Muslims, then we have a moral right and obligation to stand up and say that dharmically speaking, we want to speak up for the Muslim women and we want to help liberate them. That's number one. Then number two, we are attacking something very, very fundamental. Islam poses a serious threat to not only Muslims, Muslim women, Muslim children, everyone, but also to every civilized society, including Hindu society. Every time, every controversy we are seeing, whether it's a hijab controversy or jihad, and every one of these things are inspired and mandated as fard in Islam. Fard is a religious duty. So these are what is shaping the Muslim behavior. And every one of the challenges and problems we are seeing in society, from hijab to jihad, is a result of all of these things. So what we are now showcasing is, we are showcasing that these teachings are absolutely immoral, but these are propagated and these are mandated by Quran, Allah, and Prophet Muhammad. So when we force Muslims to confront this, and when we educate Hindus about these things, what we are creating is a setup, as I told earlier, where Muslims have to choose between morality, which means a rejection of Islam, or stay with Islam. That means they are going to be more dogmatic and they cannot have a claim to morality.
Okay.
Yeah, you can come on camera. I have no problem.
Hello, sir. So we can understand that some men are like basically not moral and attracted to prepubescent girls. But how do we understand that some fathers are allowing this to happen to their daughters, allowing to their sisters?
Great.
How are they allowing this?
This is a great question. Okay, so what happens is, I have discussed in my book and many of my writings the concept of memetic violence. Okay, there is something called meme. This is a word we use in social media all the time, right? But then let me define what a meme is. Okay, the word meme was invented by the biologist Richard Dawkins about 50 years ago. Okay, 45, 50 years ago. A meme is an analog of gene. Okay, so why do we look like our parents, or why do we talk like our parents, right? Because we inherit their genes. Okay, so gene is the biological unit by which human beings propagate themselves from one generation to another. Like that, information is disseminated in society by copying, by imitation. Okay, so what is fashion? We look at somebody and then we dress like that person. What is an accent? We look at somebody and then we start talking like those people. Okay, so these are all memes. Okay, a meme is information that is mimicked, that's copied, and that is transmitted. Okay, and not every meme is beneficial. Some memes are beneficial and some are harmful. Okay, those memes which are harmful are called memetic virus. Okay, a memetic virus, typically Islam, for example, is a memetic virus. When a child is raised as a Muslim, by the time she's 8 or 9, she's already conditioned to be a Muslim, or he is conditioned to be a Muslim. So what is that they start believing? They start believing that there exists Allah, and Allah made a revelation to uh, Prophet Muhammad 1300 years ago, and Muhammad is the perfect role model, and we have to follow all these things. Now, you, the moment you start accepting this, then uh, you are not going to criticize the actions of Muhammad or the teachings of Sharia and the verses of the Quran. These are not bad things. Actually, these are wonderful things for you to emulate. Okay, and this is why a father whose worldview is warped by this memetic virus no longer thinks reasonably. He doesn't think, look, this is my own child. Okay, how can I marry her off? She's not even attained her puberty. How can I marry her off to an extremely old man? And that is tantamount to rape. He doesn't think like that. Okay. On the other hand, thinks, I am fulfilling fard, my religious duty. And this is approved by the Quran. This is approved by the example of Prophet Muhammad. So this is legitimate. So this is why we cannot spare a critique of the very core foundations of Islam and its texts and its beliefs.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I mean, my point is that, not only child marriage, there are many things which are not good in Islam, I mean, to use the very mild word, but, Islam is such a large religion, much bigger than Hinduism also, and there are nearly 45, 50 countries which are Islamic countries. So where do we stand? I mean, is it possible to, preach all this and then, score any, even a minimum amount of victory?
I
That's my
believe, yes,
question.
I believe it's absolutely possible, because so look at that's the reason I played the videos, right? So these are the Arab people. Okay, they were born and brought up as Muslims. Okay, and then like 99% of the Muslims are not aware of uh, uh, what is really there in the Quran, what Quran teaches. Okay, so they follow these things because they live in a Muslim or an Islamic ecosystem, and but when a mullah says that a 3-year-old girl can be married off because they are shocked, right? And then they start challenging. And then when the mullah then points out this is there in the Quran, or opposing the Quran, they are in a state of shock. They do not know what to deal with it. They are now facing a moral dilemma. Now, do I reject the Quranic verse? Then that makes me an apostate. Okay, then I go to hell. Or if I accept the Quranic verse, then do I countenance this practice of child marriage and the rape of a child? That's the dilemma they are now forced with. And you can rest assured that everyone in the audience would be facing the same dilemma. And a large number of them would eventually come out of Islam. And why do I think so? There is a conversation between Zakir Naik and Yasir Qadhi, okay, which is there on the internet. Okay, there they talk about apostasy in Islam, and Zakir Naik points out, and Yasir Qadhi agrees with that, that when Arabs from Saudi Arabia, they travel outside the country, 25% of them become apostates right away. Okay, they become ex-Muslims. And by various yardsticks, as Muslims are exposed to what really the Quran is, what really Islam teaches, a large number of them are actually giving up Islam, but they cannot come out openly. In fact, there is a conversation I am planning to have with an ex-Muslim from Pakistan in the coming months, which talks about a large number of Pakistani Muslims have actually become apostates, but they cannot openly come out and say these things in public. So what we are trying to do is we are creating the critical mass with this knowledge to allow Muslims to become ex-Muslims. So if we don't even try that, then what is the alternative? The alternative is, in the 7th, 8th century, what we call Pakistan today was the epicenter of Hinduism and Buddhism. That's where we had Takshashila. That's where we had, Deval Deval was one of the centers of Hindu learning. That's where, Devala Shruti was written. So if we don't talk about these things and if we keep quiet, then the Islamic mimetic virus will continue to spread. And just like it took over Pakistan, it took over Kashmir, it took over Bengal and a lot of other parts of India, it will eventually end up colonizing the rest of the world. So this is what Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who's a professor at NYU and a brilliant writer, he wrote a book called Skin in the Game, and he talks about that the most intolerant wins. Okay, Islam is an intolerant religion, and it will eventually win. However, the only hope we have is to counter that and to challenge that, and then to take the attack to Islam, so that by exposing it, we get the Muslims to renounce Islam, either publicly or in private, and we can make this a better world for us to live in.
It was a wonderful lecture, sir. May I know where you are living, sir?
I live in the US. I live in California.
Oh,
just a moment. One thing, sir. Can I, Raj?
Oh, please.
We all know you are telling that in Kerala, 6 years marriage still fathers are allowing. So why government of India not imposing uniform civil code and banning all the ill verses of Quran?
Oh, very simple. Very simple, right? There are two reasons, right? One is there is a lot of ignorance about Islam, the Quran, Prophet Muhammad, etc., even among the Hindus. I'm not just talking about uneducated Hindus. I'm talking about really educated Hindus. Okay, if you go back the last 100 years, you can find dozens and dozens of Hindu political leaders, intellectuals, and even Hindu swamis. They will be praising Islam, they'll be praising Muhammad, they'll be hailing the Quran. None of them have even read those things. Okay, Gandhi, for example, Ishwara Allah Tero Naam. Okay, he takes a very beautiful Vaishnava bhajan and then he injects the name of Allah into that. Okay, and this is something a lot of Hindu swamis have done. Okay, and I don't want to name them because my idea is not to ridicule the Hindu swamis, but most of them are completely ignorant of Islam. They have not read a single text, but they go about praising it. So this has conditioned Hindus. As a result of the large number of Hindus have inherited this infection called Sarva Dharma Samabhava. Okay, that means all religions are one and the same. All religions teach the same thing. They all take us to the same goal. This kind of nonsensical belief has been planted in the minds of Hindus for 150 years by our own Hindu swamis, whose knowledge could be written on the head of a pin, and you will still have enough space to accommodate the knowledge of every other Hindu swami about these religions. So this is the first reason. Then the second reason is Muslims constitute a vote bank. Okay, and then they are willing to come out and riot on the street. Look at the hijab controversy in Karnataka. So they are willing to go out and carry out jihad and kill somebody, a 26-year-old man, Harsha, simply because he criticized hijab and he wanted a hijab ban. Okay, they are willing to go on the street. It's called street power. This is what Arif Muhammad Khan, the governor of Kerala, talks about: street power. Okay, they always flex their muscle and the rest of society caves in. That's reason number two. Then third, Hindus themselves are completely lacking in strategic thinking. Okay, so as Hindus, do we care about the future of our civilization? And if we care about the future of our civilization, we elected a Hindu government. Okay, we had the numbers to legislate in the houses and to make it a law. How many laws did we really demand? Almost nothing. Okay, and if we Hindus collectively come together and say, I want a ban on hijab, I want all the laws, blasphemy laws that we have in India, which mean you criticize Islam, you criticize Christianity, then you will go to jail. Scrap all those laws. We could have demanded, and the government could have legislated. We did not demand, the government did not legislate. So we are dealing with inertia, and that's what we are trying to change here.
Then there is a proverb that any country having more than 15% Muslim is going to be an Islamic country in long run.
Correct. Correct.
That is going to happen in India. Talking all these
It may
things.
happen, right? I do not. I cannot predict the future. Okay, I do not know whether multiple outcomes are possible. Okay, if we start educating, Hindus may wake up and then they may start demanding legislation. That's number one. Or alternative two could be Muslims can themselves start learning about their religion and then they could become apostates. That could happen. We do not know, right? But um, I would rather focus on living in the present and not wring my hands helplessly saying, oh, one day this country will become Muslim. If that is the case, then, why do we even bother with all these things? We should just go enjoy our life as long as we live. And then, our progeny will become Muslims, reconcile to the reality. No, we don't want to do that. Rather, we want to educate. And this is what Manusmriti teaches. It says, Dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. Dharma protects those who protect dharma. And we cannot be, uh, in a state of inertia and just hope things will materialize. And this is also one of the big problems with Hindus, right? We hail Vema Reddy, we hail Chhatrapati Shivaji, but our expectation always is that somebody else will go and put up all that fight and pay with his life or her life. Okay. And at the most, what we'll do is a little bit of hero worship and nothing more than that. I think that is the fundamental attitude we have to change.
One thing I like to request
and instead of same person asking multiple questions, please don't mind. I want to give opportunity to
one moment. I request you one personal thing. There is a Qiyamah day written in Quran, which coincides with 2280. That means 2280, there will be end of world and end of Islam. So why don't you give some deliberation on that Qiyamah date? The 17,000.
I don't think it is not relevant to today's topic, so we can discuss those things on a subsequent day. This kind of teaching is very central to both Islam and Christianity, and I have discussed about those things in other meetings, but it's not relevant to today's topic.
So that's a request to you.
Oh, sure. I heard it. Yeah.
For future discussion.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I think we are at the 52nd minute mark. Thank you very much for joining. Oh, okay.
What is your take on? What is your take on Hindu marriage and how do we counter that? I mean, from the Islam worldview.
Can you clarify your question better?
I mean, what I'm asking is there'll be people throwing it back on us saying that you have child marriages in Hindus.
Oh, okay. Great. Okay, I got your question. Okay, so has there been child marriage in Hinduism? Yes. Okay, and then but how is it fundamentally different from what is there in Islam? But number one, I always those of you who have followed my writings will know this. Okay, I always use one yardstick to evaluate every single religion. Okay, if it is Christianity, Islam, or Hinduism, it does not matter. The same yardstick applies. And applying that yardstick, if it so turns out that Hinduism supports or requires child marriage and this kind of rape, then Hinduism is equally worthy of criticism. However, I don't think that's the case. And why? Why is that? There are very fundamental differences. In case of Islam, the conduct of Prophet Muhammad cannot be criticized. It has to be emulated. There is no such thing in Hinduism. In Hinduism, we don't say, Sri Rama did this, Krishna did this, or someone else did this, so we have to emulate that behavior. That's fundamental difference number one. Number two, in Islam, the Quran is a revelation, and then the fard or the religious duty has been specifically called out. And three, the sunnah, which is the practices based on the Quran as well as the words and deeds of Prophet Muhammad or to be can you please mute everyone who's not speaking? Yeah. So or to be followed by every Muslim and they cannot be challenged. That is not the case in Hinduism. In Hinduism, it's exactly the opposite. How are these practices followed in Hinduism? They are followed in two different ways. Number one, through Dharma Shastras. Okay, but the Dharma Shastras, we don't have a single Dharma Shastra. A Dharma Shastra is not a revelation. Okay, a Dharma Shastra was written by rishis. They were human beings. And Manusmriti and every Dharma Shastra repeatedly tells that if some of the practices are not conducive to society, for societal well-being, then they have to be rejected and rewritten. That's exactly the reason why we have multiple Dharma Shastras and not just one Dharma Shastra. And time and again, what you find, our own stalwarts are challenging and ridiculing some of the older teachings in Dharma Shastras. I'll just give one example. Manusmriti, in one place, countenances the marriage of a much older man, that's like a 48-year-old man to a younger bride. Okay. Then when Jaimini writes his Bhashya, he mocks Manu. He says only an impotent fellow could have written this prescription. Okay. So then the second way the marriage practices are followed in Hinduism is more through the community practice. It can be a jati practice, it can be the regional practice, etc. And these can be again challenged, and these undergo change all the time. Okay. That's why nobody will say, if somebody, so for example, if 200 years back somebody was marrying off a girl at the age of 15, 16, and if we challenge it today, nobody will say, oh, by the way, this is mandated in the scripture, so you cannot challenge it, and this is blasphemy. Nobody will say that, because that doesn't exist in Hinduism. So the bottom line is this. Okay. Every society has its share of good things and bad practices, and Hinduism has had its own share of bad practices. However, since the structure of Hinduism is not one rooted in dogma, Hinduism can and has continually changed. Okay. This is not the case with Islam. If Islam had allowed for these things, Islam would have undergone similar changes, and we won't be worrying about it. Gayatri ji, question to you next.
Venkat, hello.
Let me go to Gayatri ji first, then we'll come to it.
One second.
Please, Gayatri ji, proceed.
Okay. First of all, what you said is right. Hinduism doesn't have a dogma, and so it doesn't prescribe that if there was a child marriage, then it should be continued. And Hindus' child marriage is conceptually different from the Islamic child marriage. I would like to tell you here that the consummation of marriage, even in child marriages, used to take place only when the girl turns 16 and above. Till then, the girl stays in her parents' place. So it's conceptually different, and we have a ceremony also for the consummation of marriage. So it's
That's
not
right.
like it was allowed that a 9-year-old child would be raped by a 40-year-old man or something of that kind.
You're absolutely correct, and but there is something more also, right? And for example, some of the ancient Dharma Shastras, they hail the Gandharva Vivaha as the ideal form of marriage. Okay. And then there are a lot of those descriptions. Okay. What do those descriptions say? These descriptions, the girls are going with their friends, okay, to a village fair. Okay. They meet the other boys. Okay. And then they flirt with one another. Okay. Then, there is a messenger, okay, who goes between the girl and the boy. So what does this tell you? This is not a child. Okay. This is someone, who is a young adult. Okay. Who is having these feelings. Now look at something like the Ramayana, for example. Okay, so it starts with Janaka, worried. Janaka expresses concern or a worry, right? So he says Sita has already attained the age of Pati Samyoga Sulabha. Okay, where she can have a marital union with her husband, but she is not yet married. Okay, in other words, this is the implicit message that she has already crossed this age. And again, we notice that in the when they go for the Vanavas, very first conversation that happens between Ravana and Sita. Ravana comes as a mendicant, and Sita is there, and then Sita tells about her and her husband. Okay, she says, my husband is today 25 years of age, and I'm 18 years of age. And then they had been married a year ago. Okay, so this is what the critical edition of the Ramayana tells. So looking at that, the two add up. Okay, Janaka expresses concern. My daughter has already come off the age, and she is overdue for marriage. She's not yet married. And then Sita's message, that tells you that she was 17 or so when she got married, and then Rama was 24. So here's the fundamental difference, right? So even when those marriages happen, both the bride and the groom were both young and both were of a similar age group. Okay. Now those we can always challenge and we can discuss what is the ideal age. Is it 17? Is it 18? Is it 20? Is it 21? Okay. But the fundamental difference is these two are of a very comparable age, and we know this practice exists even today. Okay. Not just in India, not in India, okay, but among the Roma, or called the gypsy people. Okay. They went from India to Europe today. Okay. They were taken as slaves by the Muslims and sold off to the church, and oppressed by the church from the 9th century onwards. Okay. And then they have the same practice. Okay. They have the village fair where their girls who are around 16, 17, they'll all nicely dressed up, and they'll go, and the boys will be like 19, 20. And then, they all go and meet, they'll flirt with one another, and they'll marry. So that's Gandharva Vivaha. We see that happening there. Okay. So this practice has survived. Okay. Now look at Kamba Ramayana. Right. In Kamba Ramayana, Sita is standing in the balcony, okay, as Rama enters, right, for the Swayamvara. Okay, by the way, the term Swayamvara itself means, you choose. Okay, so you get to choose only when you have come of a certain age. And then, Rama comes there, and then that's the genius of Kambar, right? Kambar talks about, I think, what is the entire verse? I think I may have completely forgotten the verse. Something like, what is it? கண்ணோடு கண் இணை கவ்வி ஒன்றை ஒன்று உண்ணவும் நிலை பெறாது உணர்வும் ஒன்றிட அண்ணலும் நோக்கினான் அவளும் நோக்கினாள். Okay. So what does it say? The two look at each other. Okay. And then they are overcome by passion. Okay. Love for each other, and all of their feelings, everything they fuse together. Okay. So they look at each other, and then they are completely absorbed in love or attraction for each other. Okay. This, once again, this is not a child. Okay. Contrast this with the hadiths which describe Ayesha. Ayesha is playing with the dolls. Okay. And then she's a child. The descriptions are very clear there. Okay. Versus look at Kamba Ramayana. Here we are having someone like Kambar describing, okay, how the first interaction between Rama and Sita happens, and this one is what you can very clearly see is a young adult. Okay, both of them are young adults having this, right? So I think these are some of the very fundamental things, but also another very important thing to remember is that you mentioned about some of the restrictions that had even when the marriages happened young, and one of the things was they had to complete the brahmacharya was completed in the Gurukula. Okay. And then before they married, okay, that means the Gurukula was about 12 years. Okay. Then most of them, they started their Gurukula at the age of 6 or 7 or so. And then, which means at the minimum, they were 19 years of age or so when they came out. And then they start looking for a bride. Okay. So what we are seeing is in Hinduism, if at all somebody could criticize, they could say, look, there were instances when people married young. Okay. But in those cases, most of the times, both of them were younger of age. And then, but number two, these are not mandates. We can always go ahead and challenge those things. Okay, that's what our Dharma Shastras do all the time. We can challenge and we can say, why should a girl marry at 17? Okay, why not marry at 19? Okay, we can debate about that. Okay, that option is not there in stone. So the problem is not that practice that is regressive existed at some point in time in society. The problem is, has the practice become frozen? Okay, or can we challenge it and can we change it? In Hinduism, you can challenge and you can change, and in Islam, you cannot. And in Hinduism, you have a lot of those examples and references going to text, traditions, and history, where you have very noble practices when it comes to marriage, and you don't have the same in Islam. That's the challenge.
Absolutely. And one more thing I would like to ask you, like in the modern version today, we have this child drags where children are abused. They literally are dressed in very provocative manner. And even then, you have many people asking for rights for incest in America. I mean, many of this. Isn't this a kind of a perversion which started from Islam, which is going on Is it modernly?
I want to be careful here, right? So, because we should not place every problem at the doorstep of Islam. Okay, so see, what we call the modern Western culture. Okay, I don't know whether it's just modern anymore. I think it is increasingly spreading to the rest of the world, right? And so this modern culture is something very shallow. Okay, in many regards. Okay, and it's not only shallow in terms of sexuality. So when you take something like Hinduism or any of the dharmic traditions, or even a lot of other traditions like Native Americans, other schools from Eastern religions and other things, sexuality was not something which was treated very casually. Okay, so in Hinduism, it's a purushartha, right? Dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Okay, so kama is an important purushartha. So it was not ever reduced to just physical intimacy for a few moments between a man and a woman. Okay, and it was treated as a samskara, for example, right? Every one of the event that happens in life was treated as a samskara. It was something sacred, and there was an implicit belief. When a man takes the hands of his wife and then he walks around the fire, okay, what do? They take a vow on the celestial bodies that they will stay together, okay, in this life and beyond. Okay, and so that is a very deep perspective of what these relationships are. Okay, whereas in the Western or in the modern culture, what we are seeing today is something which appeals to the base instincts. In that regard, it is similar to Christianity and Islam. Okay, it does not ask you to introspect. It just appeals to base instinct and says, it's just like having a cup of coffee. Okay, or it's like going and test driving a car. Go and test drive a girl, don't crash. That's it. Okay, so and this superfluous culture is definitely exploitative, as you point out. Okay, for example, if you take the black community in America, like 73% of the black women are single moms. Okay, so that means the man who got her pregnant and she gave birth to a child as a result of that, that man is not a fixture in the life. Okay, he just played and he went away. Okay, and this woman has to now raise the child. Okay, as a single mom. Okay, and she has to probably work 2 jobs to support these things, and it is highly exploitative, right? That's what the modern culture has given us. And this kind of superfluous culture works for a small minority of population, who are very privileged, very rich and everything. Okay, for them it does not matter. Okay, hey, they can go and live with anyone. But then for the rest of the world, a relationship is what actually sustains the community, not just the individual. It sustains the community. Okay, and that relationship cannot be built unless otherwise there is an understanding that these are sacred. I think we are way over the time limit. I really appreciate. I thank everyone for joining this program.
Venkat, hello.
Yeah.
I would be glad to discuss with you on my personal WhatsApp number.
Oh, sure. We can do all of that offline, but please don't publish your number here.
Please WhatsApp on my number.
No, please don't publish your number here. Okay. Please reach out to Rajiv and he can help connect. Thank you, everyone. Dhanyavad.